I used to think life settles into a peaceful rhythm once you cross your 60s. You wake up, follow the same routines, live with someone who knows your moods before you even open your mouth, and drift into the kind of comfort people spend decades praying for. That's what I believed, what I clung to, right up until the moment I realized my own home wasn't as steady as I thought. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 67, and I've spent 42 years married to a woman I thought I understood better than myself. We live in a quiet two-story house on Greenfield Road, just a few minutes from East Lampeter Township in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's the kind of place where folks wave as they drive by, and neighbors still borrow sugar and return plates after church potlucks. For most of my life, our home felt like a shelter, warm, familiar, predictable. Marianne and I settled into our routines years ago. I'd wake at 6, shuffle into the kitchen, and make the same cup of black coffee I've been drinking since the Carter administration. Marianne would join me maybe 10 minutes later, her robe tied neatly around her waist, her hair pinned back with the same silver clip she's kept in a drawer since the early 90s. We'd sit at the small table near the window, watching the early traffic move along Greenfield Road as the sun came up. Our daughter, Delaney, is 39 now, living in Harrisburg with her husband. She still calls every Sunday night, just like she did when she went away to Penn State. She likes to check on us, asks if we're eating right, if we've taken our vitamins, if we remember our appointments. Funny how your kids turn into your parents when you're not looking. If you asked me a year ago who I trusted most in the world, I would have said Marianne without hesitation. We've been through the usual storms, money being tight, raising a stubborn teenager, caring for our aging parents. We held each other through all of it. I honestly believed there wasn't a single part of my life she didn't know. But looking back, I can admit I missed the signs. They didn't show up all at once. They came quietly, slipping into our days the same way an early frost slips into October. Soft at first, then unmistakable once you finally feel it. The first thing that caught my attention was the phone. Marianne has never been someone who stayed up late scrolling or texting. She's the type who places her phone face down and forgets about it for hours. But a few months ago, I started hearing it buzz after midnight. Sometimes she'd slip out of bed, whisper in the hallway, then come back pretending nothing unusual had happened. One night, I woke up to the faint sound of her voice near the laundry room. She spoke softly, too softly, and when she noticed the floorboard creak beneath my foot, she jumped like I'd startled her. She brushed it off, said she was checking the dryer because she'd forgotten a load earlier. But there was no laundry in there. I checked after she went back to bed. Another change, the mail. Marianne has always been the one who reads every bill, every card, every catalog. Lately, though, she started grabbing the mail before I could get to it. Sometimes she'd slip certain envelopes into her purse instead of the kitchen drawer. I told myself it was probably nothing. After 4 decades of marriage, you learn to give your spouse the benefit of the doubt. But the quiet tension between us was growing. I'd ask a simple question, who was on the phone, or what came in the mail today? And she'd give me the shortest answer possible. Or she'd turn the question around, asking why I was so curious. We'd never been that kind of couple. We used to share everything, even the smallest details. One Friday morning, I noticed she left early for her volunteer shift at the Lancaster Public Library. She said she needed to prepare for a meeting there. But when I passed the library around lunchtime on my way to pick up dog food, her car wasn't in the lot. I sat in my truck for a long moment, staring at the empty space where her car should have been. I wanted to believe I was mistaken, that maybe she'd parked around the corner or simply stepped out to grab something nearby. But something inside me, the part of me that still tries to listen to my gut at this age, told me that wasn't the case. You know, after 42 years with someone, you can sense when the air between you shifts, when the room feels different, when your partner enters the house but leaves a piece of themselves outside. That's how it started to feel with Marianne. and it's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone. I remember sitting at the table one evening, watching her stir a pot of soup. She moved the same way she always had, slow, focused, humming under her breath. Everything about the scene should have felt normal, but I couldn't shake the awareness that something was off. Like she was carrying a weight she wouldn't talk about. Like she was keeping a distance she didn't intend to explain. That night, lying beside her in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and felt a pull in my chest. A quiet warning, a sense that something in my life was shifting, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't understand it then, not fully. I didn't know how deep it went or how much it would change everything I believed about my marriage. I just knew the woman I'd loved for more than 4 decades was hiding something she didn't want me to see. And that was the first time in years I struggled to fall asleep in my own home. If you're watching this on the Old Man Tales, tell me, have you ever felt your partner pulling away, even when they swore everything was fine? Share your thoughts in the comments. It helps more than you'd think. The morning everything changed started out as ordinary as any other on Greenfield Road. A light chill hung in the air, the kind that makes your knees complain before you even stand up. Marianne was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming softly over the skillet. She didn't look up when I entered, just said, "Morning," in a voice that felt a little too careful. Our mail usually arrived around 10, but that day it came early. I stepped outside to grab it, mostly because I needed fresh air. I needed to clear the thoughts that had been gnawing at me for weeks. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that Lancaster mornings are known for. Cars heading toward Route 30. A distant mower. The neighbor's dog barking at nothing in particular. I opened the box expecting the usual stack. Electric bill, grocery ads. The magazine Marian never cancels, even though she barely reads it. But sitting in the middle of the pile was a thick, cream-colored envelope. Heavier than the rest. Old-fashioned. The name typed on the front stopped me cold. Margaret Ellison. Same address. Same house. Same mailbox. But not the name of the woman I'd shared a bed with for 42 years. I stood there a long moment, staring at the envelope. The longer I looked at it, the stranger it felt in my hand. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was misdelivered. Maybe it belonged to someone who lived here decades ago. Maybe the sender typed the wrong name. But something in me resisted those explanations. I walked back inside, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mail's here," I said, setting the stack on the table. Marianne turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Anything important?" I wasn't sure why, but I kept the thick envelope in my hand instead of placing it with the rest. "There's one addressed to someone named Margaret Ellison. You know her?" It was subtle, so subtle someone else might have missed it. But Marianne's face tightened just for a second. Her eyes flicked to the envelope like it was something dangerous. "That's a mistake," she said too quickly. "Just give it to me." I didn't move. The weight in my hand felt heavier now, anchored by something I couldn't name yet. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it before she could stop me. "Gerald, don't." But the papers were already spilling onto the table. Old court documents, worn at the edges. A hospital bill from York General Hospital, dated 1991. A notice referencing a minor, something about custody and temporary care. A name I didn't recognize. Case hashtag 1142-93. I stared at the pages, my chest tightening as the words blurred together. I didn't understand everything at once, but I understood enough to feel the ground shift under me. "Marianne, why is this addressed to someone named Margaret Ellison? Who is that?" She snatched the papers off the table, so fast one of them slid to the floor. Her hands trembled as she pressed everything against her chest. "It's nothing," she said, her voice rising. "You shouldn't have opened it." "Nothing." My own voice cracked. "Court papers and a hospital bill addressed to another name? That's nothing to you." She backed away from the table, clutching the envelope like she needed to hide it from the light. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen fear in her eyes, real fear, not annoyance, not frustration, but something deeper. "Gerald, please," she whispered. "Just let it go." I felt something inside me twist. Let it go? After weeks of late-night calls and whispered conversations? After finding her car missing when she claimed she was at the library? After the envelopes she tucked away in her purse? "What's going on?" I asked quietly. "Why would you get legal papers under another name? Why would you hide them from me?" "I'm not hiding anything." "You are hiding something. You're hiding everything." She sank into the nearest chair, the envelope dropping onto her lap. For a moment, she looked older than I'd ever seen her, like the weight of those papers had been pressing on her for years, not just minutes. "I told you," she repeated, softer this time. "It's nothing you need to worry about." That's not an answer. She closed her eyes like my words physically hurt. "I can't explain it. Not right now." "Why not?" "Because you'll see me differently." She opened her eyes again, and this time I saw the truth. She believed it. Whatever was inside that envelope wasn't small. It was something she thought could change the way I looked at her. "Marianne," I said slowly, "I've been married to you for 42 years. There's nothing you could tell me that would make me stop loving you." But she didn't look convinced. If anything, her fear deepened. She stood up, gathered the documents, and headed toward the stairs. "I need time, Gerald. Just let me think." She didn't wait for my response. She didn't look back. She just walked away and closed our bedroom door behind her. I stayed frozen in the kitchen, staring at the chair she'd left empty. My mind raced through every memory I had of her, searching for anything that aligned with the name Margaret Ellison. Nothing did, not even close. I picked up the one paper she dropped, the hospital bill, from the floor. It was crumpled from her grip. York General Hospital. Date of service, May 12, 1991. Patient, Margaret Ellison. My wife was 29 in 1991. We were living in York then, renting a small place on Vander Avenue, still figuring out life with a toddler. Nothing about that time ever suggested another identity, another name, another life. But as I stared at that paper, the truth settled over me like ice. There was a part of Marianne's life I didn't know, a part she'd hidden long before I ever asked a single question, a part that was resurfacing, whether she wanted it to or not. And suddenly, the quiet life I thought I knew didn't feel quiet anymore. If you're watching this on the Old Man Tales, tell me honestly, if you found court papers addressed to another name in your spouse's mail, what would you do? Would you confront them right away or wait? Please subscribe and stay tuned. Share your thoughts in the comments. The next morning I tried again. I thought perhaps after a night of sleep, Marianne would be more willing to talk. I found her in the kitchen, her back to me, flipping pancakes as if nothing had happened. The sunlight coming through the blinds caught the strands of gray in her hair and made her look fragile, yet impossibly stubborn. "Marianne," I started to try and keep my voice calm. "We need to talk about yesterday." She stiffened. I saw the tension coil through her shoulders. She didn't turn around, didn't meet my eyes. "I told you, Gerald," she said, her voice tight. "It's old business. I don't want to rehash it." Old business. That's what you called it. And in that single phrase, she drew a wall between us. I could feel it in my chest. A wall I didn't know existed. I remember now how our early years together were sprinkled with these walls. Small ones at first, questions about her parents, her childhood in Harrisburg, the summer she spent with her aunt in Chambersburg. I had asked once about a cousin she'd mentioned in passing. She deflected, laughed nervously, and changed the subject. I didn't push. I loved her too much to pry. I loved her too much to see the spaces in her stories, the things she carefully omitted. I ignored the gaps, the questions she brushed off, the look she shot me when I lingered on a topic for too long. And now, I could see what I'd been letting slip past me. Those omissions were pieces of a puzzle I had never thought to finish. I tried again. Marianne, this isn't something I can just ignore. I need to know who Margaret Ellison is. Why you're receiving these papers. Please, talk to me. She stopped flipping pancakes and turned to face me, but only partially. Her eyes were guarded, calculating, a wall of fear just behind them. She shook her head. Gerald, I can't. I'm telling you, it's nothing you need to worry about. You don't want to know. You're wrong. I do want to know, I said, my voice rising slightly. We've been married for 42 years. We've shared everything. Our money, our home, our family. Why would you keep something from me now? Her eyes flicked toward the stack of mail on the counter, and I followed her gaze. Another envelope had arrived, thicker than the usual bills and flyers. It was stamped Hagerstown, Maryland. She grabbed it almost instinctively and tucked it into her purse, spinning away as if to hide it. That's when the unease became undeniable. This wasn't an isolated incident. The first envelope had been a shock, yes, but now it was happening again. There was a pattern, one she refused to acknowledge, and I could feel it pressing in on the life we had built together. I remember pacing the kitchen, the early morning light making the linoleum gleam under my shoes. My mind was spinning. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was old business, really. Maybe Margaret Ellison was someone from a past she had the right to leave behind. But the fear gnawed at me, the feeling that this envelope, like the last, carried a truth Marianne wasn't ready to face. I thought back to that time when she had refused to tell me about her aunt's accident in Chambersburg, or when she had claimed a cousin's disappearance was irrelevant to our lives. I had let slide then. I had let it slide because I loved her. I had let it slide because I trusted her. I had let it slide because I believed she would tell me when the time was right. But now the time had passed. The envelopes were no longer sporadic reminders of a buried past. They were persistent, like a warning I couldn't ignore. And Marianne, despite her protests, was no longer the woman who could shrug off the questions or smile and say, "It doesn't matter." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My hand hovered over the counter where the envelope had rested just moments before, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my ears. Something in me shifted. I realized that ignoring this would be a mistake. Pretending the letters didn't exist would be a mistake. Waiting for Marianne to decide it was time to tell me would be a mistake. I couldn't do it anymore. Not after 42 years of marriage. Not when the calm I had taken for granted was cracking right under my feet. That afternoon, Marianne left to visit her sister in Bethlehem, claiming it was just a short trip to help with a craft fair. I stayed behind, staring at the spot where the Hagerstown envelope had been, thinking about all the secrets that had quietly stacked up over the years. For the first time in decades, I realized that love alone wasn't enough. Trust wasn't enough. I needed answers. And if Marion wouldn't give them, I knew I had to find them myself. By the time the sun began to dip behind the rooftops of Lancaster, I had made a decision. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I couldn't pretend that life was the same as it had always been. Something had shifted, and I had to follow it, wherever it might lead. That evening, I sat in the living room, the quiet pressing against me, and thought about how little I truly knew about the woman I had spent most of my life loving. And for the first time in a long while, fear edged its way into my chest, not fear of losing her, but fear of what I might finally discover. I spent that night pacing the living room, staring at the Hagerstown envelope Marianne had tucked away, wondering how deep this rabbit hole went. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't wait for her to tell me. I had to start digging myself. I started small with public records. Williamsport, Hagerstown, Lancaster. I had always avoided that part of research in my life, too invasive. But now I couldn't stop myself. My hand shook slightly as I typed Margaret Ellison into the State Archives database, the cursor blinking at me like it was daring me to continue. The first record I found was simple: a residency card from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, dated 1985. Margaret Ellison, female, age 23. Nothing else. The next few entries were even stranger. A few utility bills of voter registration record. And then, suddenly nothing. She disappeared. No trace beyond 1987. I felt a chill creeping over me. My mind went back to Marianne, back to the way she had dodged questions about her past, how she had flinched at mentions of family, how she had skirted any discussions about her early 20s. I had dismissed it as caution or personal privacy. Now, I wondered if it had been something more. The deeper I dug, the more unsettling things became. I discovered a hospital record from Williamsport General Hospital, dated March 1986. The entry was short: patient, Margaret Ellison. Delivery, male infant. Condition, stable. A child, Marianne, or whoever Margaret Ellison was, had delivered a baby decades ago, and I had never known. I sat back in my chair and ran my hands over my face. The timing was what shook me most. I had met Marianne in 1986, the summer she moved to Lancaster. A single woman, according to everything I had been told. But now I was staring at a document proving she, or someone under this other name, had given birth at the same time. My stomach turned as my mind raced. Was it possible she had lived a completely different life before I met her? Could the woman I married, the woman I trusted with every piece of my heart, have been someone else entirely? The thought made me feel as though I were falling through air, even while sitting firmly in my armchair. I picked up the documents again, tracing the dates with my finger as if touching them could answer the questions burning in my mind. I thought back to the early days of our courtship. Marianne had been private, yes, but she had always seemed honest in the ways that mattered. So I told myself, when she spoke about her family, she always avoided specifics. But I hadn't pressed her. I hadn't known there was a reason to. Now every unanswered question seemed significant. Every casual evasion, a warning I had ignored. I spent hours scanning online archives, flipping through microfilm records from libraries in Pennsylvania. Each new record of Margaret Ellison was like a shadow of a life I had never seen, a version of Marion that no one had spoken about. The address from Hagerstown appeared again, this time on a notice related to a minor, legal in nature, a year after the birth record. I didn't understand it fully, but I understood enough. There was a history here that Marianne had carried alone. By late afternoon, my head was pounding, my hands numb from scrolling and writing down addresses, dates, and names. I leaned back in the chair, trying to make sense of it all. Williamsport, Hagerstown, the hospital records, the birth certificate. They weren't coincidences. They were pieces of something Marianne had never shared with me. The worst part wasn't even the secret itself. It was that she had lived with this truth so quietly for decades, carrying it like a weight I had never imagined. And for the first time in 42 years, I began to wonder if the woman I had married, the Marianne I knew, had carefully left pieces of herself behind, pieces she could never bring to Lancaster. My phone buzzed with a text from Marianne, asking if I'd gotten the mail. I didn't answer immediately. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant, almost afraid of what I might type. The thought that had been slowly creeping through my mind all morning now solidified into a terrifying question. Had I married Marianne Whitmore, the woman I loved, or had I married Margaret Ellison, someone who had carefully rewritten her life and identity to escape a past that was now clawing its way back to us? I could feel the tension pressing against me, thick as the summer air that seeped through the window. Something in our life, our home, the quiet routines I had always relied on, was no longer the safe harbor I believed it to be. I realized I was standing at the edge of a truth I had never imagined, staring down into a past Marianne refused to discuss. By evening, the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Lancaster, and the shadows of the house seemed longer, heavier. I gathered all the papers I had pulled together, the court notices, hospital records, and residency files, and laid them on the table. They were evidence of a life I didn't know, a life hidden in plain sight. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. I could no longer wait. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Mary Ann's past was no longer hers alone. It had become mine, too, whether I wanted it or not. I made a quiet vow to myself. No more hesitation. No more pretending. If she wouldn't tell me, I would find out. I had to. Because some secrets I realized don't stay hidden forever. And some truths, when they surface, change everything. Have you ever discovered a hidden past in someone you thought you knew completely? Comment below. Would you keep digging or let it be? Mary Ann left for the weekend, telling me she was heading to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, to help her sister with a craft fair. I didn't protest. I couldn't. My mind was too busy spinning, too restless to sit quietly in the living room, pretending that life was normal. Something had shifted between us, and the envelopes, the documents, and the shadows of her past wouldn't leave me alone. By Saturday morning, the house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every small sound, like the refrigerator humming or the ticking of the living room clock, feel louder than it should. I knew where I needed to go. I hadn't wanted to, not really, but I couldn't stop myself. The attic. I climbed the narrow staircase, each step creaking under my weight, carrying a flashlight in one hand and a growing sense of dread in the other. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, streaming through the small attic window. Boxes, old furniture, and forgotten holiday decorations filled the space. Most of it was nothing. Relics of a life lived slowly and carefully. But there was one box that stood out, a small, weathered wooden box, sealed with a simple latch and tucked under a stack of old winter coats. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked and tied with a faded ribbon, were papers, photographs, and small objects that immediately made my heart race. The first item I pulled out was a birth certificate. The name on it was Margaret Ellison. I traced the letters with a trembling finger. The birth date matched nothing about Delaney, and yet it matched the time when Mary Ann Margaret would have been in her mid-20s. Next, I found a faded baby blanket, frayed at the edges, smelling faintly of old fabric softener and time. It looked impossibly fragile, like it had been held close by someone who couldn't let go. Then came a hospital discharge summary. My hands were shaking too much to read all of it at first. The summary described a newborn with complications. My chest tightened as I read the medical jargon, feeling a hollow ache start in my stomach. Mary Ann had carried a child in secrecy, and something had gone wrong at the very beginning. And then finally, a photograph. Mary Ann smiling softly, holding a tiny infant wrapped in that same faded blanket. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that baby wasn't Delaney. The dates didn't line up. The photograph had a hospital stamp on the corner. Williamsport General Hospital, March 1986. I sank to my knees on the dusty floor, staring at the image. The woman in the photo was Mary Ann, or Margaret, but the baby she held was a stranger to me. A child I had never known existed. A child she had kept hidden for decades. I felt a dizzying mix of emotions. Betrayal, confusion, sorrow, and a strange, aching empathy. How much had she carried all these years without telling me? How had she managed the grief, the secrecy, the fear? And why had she chosen to bury it so deeply that I would only discover it now, after 42 years of marriage? I carefully gathered the items from box, laying them on the attic floor. I traced the edges of the blanket again, trying to imagine the hands that had held it before mine. I looked at the birth certificate, the hospital summary, and the photograph in sequence, each piece of evidence building a narrative I had never been part of. I thought about Delaney, about the life we raised together. I had believed our family story was complete, that our home contained all the love, loss, and truth there was to know. But now, staring at this proof, I realized how fragile that belief had been. Our family was built on omissions I had never suspected existed, on silence that had stretched decades. A shiver ran through me, a cold, shaking awareness that the life I thought I understood was only half visible. Marianne had been someone else before me, someone who had loved, lost, and survived in ways I could barely imagine. She had made the choice to start over, to rebuild a life that was safe, orderly, and shared with me. And yet, the weight of her hidden past pressed through the attic ceiling and into my chest now, undeniable and suffocating. I sank back against a pile of boxes, holding the photograph in my hand. The baby's tiny fist clutched the edge of the blanket, oblivious to the decades of secrets waiting in the shadows. My mind raced with questions. Why hadn't she told me? Was the child alive or gone? Did anyone else know? Had this secret been the reason for her late-night phone calls, the envelopes, the hesitation in her eyes? Tears blurred my vision as I realized the full impact. My wife, my Marianne, had lived a hidden life I could barely begin to comprehend. And yet, despite the shock, a part of me understood her choice. To reveal it all might have destroyed everything we had built. I had married a survivor, someone brave enough to start over even when the past refused to leave her alone. I stayed in the attic for what felt like hours, staring at the evidence of a life I didn't know existed. When I finally set the photograph and papers back in the box, I shook, not from cold, not from dust, but from the realization that Marianne had a child before Delaney, a child I would never have suspected. And in that shaking, I understood that everything was about to change. The quiet life I thought I knew had already shifted. Before I continue, if you discovered your spouse had a child you never knew about, what would you feel first? Anger, sorrow, or shock? Comment below. I wasn't prepared for the phone call. Not really. It came late Sunday afternoon, when I was still trying to piece together the secrets I had uncovered in the attic. The house was quiet, Marianne still away in Bethlehem, and the only sounds were the ticking clock and the occasional bark from our neighbor's dog. The caller ID flashed an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it ring, to pretend it wasn't there. But something call it curiosity, call it dread. Maybe pick up, hello. My voice sounded rough, like I hadn't used it in hours. Mr. Whitmore? The voice was calm, male, measured, but with an edge that made my stomach twist. This is David Klein. I need to speak with Marianne. It's urgent. I froze. My first reaction was anger. Who was this man calling my house about my wife? She's not here, I said, keeping my voice even. She left for the weekend. Can I take a message? There was a pause, long enough that I could feel the seconds pressing against me. Then he spoke again. Tell her I said the past doesn't stay buried. That was it, just that one line. And then the click of the phone. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the receiver, my mind scrambling. The past doesn't stay buried? What did that mean? What past? My heart was racing, so fast I thought I might feel it in my throat. I thought back to the attic, the birth certificate, the photograph, the hospital discharge summary. Margaret Ellison, a child before Delaney. The Hagerstown envelope, the documents that Marianne had tried to hide. And now this man, David Klein, was suddenly in the mix. A stranger, claiming to know something urgent. Did he know about the child? Had he known Marianne or Margaret decades ago? Or was he somehow connected to a part of her life she had buried even from me? I tried calling back. The number was already disconnected. I called again. Same result. Dead ends. Anger rose in me, thick and hot. How dare someone intrude on our lives like this? Who did he think he was, calling about my wife? And yet there was fear, too. A deep, gnawing fear that the calm life I had clung to for years was slipping through my fingers. That Marianne's past was not only real, but reaching toward us now. I replayed the conversation over and over. The past doesn't stay buried. Those words echoed in my mind, blending with the memories of late-night phone calls Marianne had taken, the envelopes she had hidden, the way she had avoided questions about her early 20s. I couldn't help but wonder, had she been hiding something dangerous? Something that might put our lives at risk? Or was it a pain from the past, a secret too heavy for anyone to carry? Now finally catching up to her, I tried to push the thoughts aside, tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe David Klein was a mistake. Maybe someone misdialed. But I knew, deep down, that wasn't true. There was an urgency in his voice that was undeniable, a warning. And it wasn't just about Marianne, it was about me now, too, whether I liked it or not. I sat down in the living room, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair, and tried to sort through what I knew. The attic, the envelopes, Margaret Ellison, the hospital records, and now this man, who claimed to be a friend but sounded far from friendly. I realized something important. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't sit back and pretend the past wouldn't catch up with us. Marianne had chosen to carry these secrets alone for decades, but now they were bleeding into the present, dragging me into them, whether I wanted to be involved or not. I thought about calling Marianne immediately, but I hesitated. I wanted to protect her privacy, but also I didn't want to let her see me panicked. I didn't want to give away the storm that had already begun to brew inside me. So I sat, staring at the phone, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. The quiet house suddenly felt foreign, almost menacing, as though it held more secrets than I could uncover in a single afternoon. The ordinary routine of Lancaster streets, the Sunday quiet, the distant hum of traffic, it all felt like a mask covering something far more complicated. I couldn't stop thinking about David Klein. Who was he? And how did he know? My mind raced through every possibility. Was he connected to the child? To Margaret Ellison? To an event in Marianne's past I had never imagined? I didn't have answers. I didn't even have leads. All I had were questions, each one heavier than the last, each one echoing in the silent house. And I realized that the life I thought I knew, the life that had felt safe for over 4 decades, was gone. By the time evening came, I hadn't made a single call back. I hadn't solved anything. I only knew one thing. The past Marianne had carried for so long was no longer hers alone. And if I wanted to protect her, or even understand her, I had to face it head on. The attic box had changed everything. Even now, days later, I couldn't look at it without a sharp, twisting knot in my chest. Marianne was back from Bethlehem, moving through the house as if nothing had happened, humming softly while I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread around me. I couldn't stop thinking, couldn't stop piecing together fragments of a life she had kept hidden for decades. I had spent hours rereading the documents I found, birth certificates, hospital discharge summaries, the photograph of her holding that tiny infant. But one paper had nagged at me more than the rest. A small medical note tucked in with the discharge summary. Hard to read, yellowed with age, but unmistakable. Patient's child placed in state custody. Reason: maternal inability to provide care due to circumstances requiring further review. I leaned back in my chair, the words echoing in my mind. Maternal inability. State custody. A child taken from his mother. I felt a cold wash of disbelief. Marianne had a son she had never mentioned, never hinted at, never let me even know existed. I tried to imagine it, but my mind refused. I'd always pictured our early years together as simple. 2 people finding their way through life, planning a future, building a home. But now I saw another story layered beneath ours, one filled with pain, secrecy, and decisions made far before I ever came into her life. The thought of the child stirred something fierce inside me. Anger, mostly anger that she had hidden this from me. Betrayal, too, in a way I hadn't felt before. Yet that anger twisted into something else, something almost unbearable. Sorrow for Marianne. The life she had been forced to live in silence. The weight she carried alone. The grief I hadn't known she bore. I stared at the photograph of Marianne holding the baby. Her eyes, soft and radiant in the image, were filled with love and fear all at once. She looked so proud, so fragile. The edges of the photo were frayed from handling, from memory, from secrecy. And I felt a strange ache, a connection to a sorrow I had never shared. Why hadn't she told me? Why had she allowed me to think our story began with Delaney, when the truth stretched back to this hidden child, this son she had lost? I could feel the weight of that question pressing against my chest, the corners of my vision sharpening with disbelief. I searched through public records again, combing through birth registries, court records, and even old local newspapers. A child placed in state custody in Williamsport, 1986. The dates lining up perfectly with the other documents. But beyond that, there was nothing. No name, no follow-up, no trace of the boy she had carried, held, and then lost. I could imagine her, a 20-something woman, alone, terrified, having to make a choice no mother should ever face. Perhaps she had pleaded, perhaps she had fought, but the system had its way, and the outcome was something I could barely comprehend. I felt my hands shake as I thought about it. 42 years of marriage, and yet there had been this enormous gap in our story. I had believed we shared everything. I had trusted her completely, but here was this secret, a living fragment of her past that she had carried alone, hidden even from me. I wondered about the reasons. What could have been so severe, so terrifying, that Marian never told me? Was it shame, fear, self-protection? Or had she believed that if she revealed it, it would undo everything we had built together? Sitting there, surrounded by decades-old papers, I realized the gravity of what I had just uncovered. Our life had always felt like a complete story, a book we had written together. But now I saw missing chapters, painful, hidden, and powerful enough to shape the person I had married without my knowing. I ran a hand over the photograph again. Marianne had been brave, stronger than I had ever realized. She had built a life, had loved, had chosen to start over, all while holding the weight of a child she had never spoken of. And yet, I couldn't deny the sting of betrayal, the quiet suspicion that maybe some part of her had thought I couldn't handle the truth. For the first time, I understood how carefully she had constructed the life she wanted to share. And for the first time, I wondered what else I didn't know, what other pieces of her past were waiting, hidden in envelopes and attics, in the quiet spaces of our home. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Greenfield Road, at the trees swaying in the late afternoon breeze. The street looked the same as it always had, ordinary and peaceful. But I felt as though the world had shifted. The quiet comfort of our home, the certainty I had relied on for decades, was gone, replaced with questions, with fear, with a knowledge that Marianne's past was reaching into the present, and I could no longer ignore it. A lifetime of trust felt fragile, almost brittle. And yet, in the midst of the shock and confusion, I felt something else. Resolve. I had to understand the full truth, no matter how painful. I had to know the boy Marian never mentioned. I had to face the past she had hidden for so long. Because if I didn't, I realized I would never fully know the woman I had spent my life loving. And I couldn't bear that thought. Marianne returned late Monday afternoon, carrying her bag from Bethlehem like any other weekend. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would confront her without letting anger take over. But when she stepped through the door, I realized that nothing I had rehearsed could prepare me for what was coming. I waited until she hung her coat and walked into the living room. The box from the attic was on the table. Papers splayed like evidence of a life I had only just begun to understand. "Marianne," I started, my voice steady but firm. I found everything. The envelopes, the birth certificate, the photograph, the medical notes. I know who Margaret Ellison was. I know there's a child. I can't ignore this anymore. I need the truth. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes avoided mine, and then, finally, she sank into the armchair, burying her face in her hands. I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, her voice cracking. "All these years, and now—" I knelt beside her, unsure of what else to do, but let her feel the weight of her own relief, and perhaps her fear. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes glossy with tears. My real name was Margaret Ellison," she said, her voice shaking. "I changed it when I came to Lancaster. I had to start over. I had to leave that life behind." I swallowed hard, my chest tight. "Why? What happened?" She drew a shaky breath. "I was involved with someone dangerous. His name doesn't matter now. He was volatile, controlling, violent. One horrible night, he nearly harmed my baby. The state had to step in. They took him away." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had expected secrets, but this was trauma carried silently for decades. I reached for her hand, cold and shaking, and she let me take it. Her fingers brittle with years of suppressed fear and grief. "I fled to Lancaster," she continued, "to escape that life, to escape him. I wanted to give myself a chance to survive, to love, to live without constant fear." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for understanding. "I never wanted to tell anyone. Not you. Not Delaney. Not a soul." I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Anger, yes, but also overwhelming sorrow. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had married, had carried this unimaginable burden alone. And for decades I had not known. But what happened to him? I asked gently, though the question felt impossible to speak. "The child, my wife, your son?" She flinched, and her eyes filled with pain I couldn't bear to see. I can't tell you that yet," she whispered. "Not now. Maybe not ever. It's complicated, too dangerous to explain. I've kept it hidden because I thought it would protect him and me." I felt the ache of betrayal, sharp and undeniable, but also a deep, consuming sadness for Marianne herself. She had sacrificed everything to shield a secret, to protect someone I didn't even know existed. And yet, the fact remained, she had withheld this from me. 42 years of trust, and here was a part of her life I had never touched. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you comfort someone whose past is riddled with pain and fear, whose secrets shake the foundation of everything you've known about your life together? I don't know what to say," I admitted finally, my voice raw. "All I know is that I love you, Marianne. Margaret, whoever you are, but this changes everything. And I need to understand more about him, about what happened." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I can't. I can't. Not yet. I'm so sorry, Gerald. I should have told you. I should have, but I didn't. And now everything is out in the open, and I don't know if we can ever go back." I took a deep breath, sitting back in my chair and letting the weight of her confession settle around us. The attic box, the envelopes, the documents, they had all led to this moment. The truth, finally spoken, was raw and unfiltered, but it came with its own silence, one that hung heavy in the room, impossible to break, impossible to ignore. I reached for her again, and this time she leaned into me, letting her body collapse against mine. I felt her trembling, her grief for shame, and even in the midst of fear and confusion, I felt something else. Connection, love, a fragile but undeniable bond. Her secrets were not just hers anymore. They had become ours, tangled into the life we had built, forcing us to confront truths we had spent decades apart from. And though one question remained unanswered, what happened to her son, I understood that the road to understanding, to forgiveness, and perhaps to healing was just beginning. That night we sat together, holding hands in silence, the weight of the past pressing around us. I didn't have the answers I wanted. I didn't know the fate of the child she had lost. But I knew one thing. Marianne had finally broken, and in breaking, she had given me a chance to see the depth of her pain and the courage it had taken to survive. The air between us felt heavier than ever that evening, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for Marianne to speak again. She hadn't said much since her initial confession, just sat with her hands folded, trembling slightly, staring at the worn carpet as though it could answer the questions she couldn't. I need to tell you more, she finally whispered. Her voice was fragile, nearly breaking with each word. I nodded, silent, giving her the space she clearly needed. About him, about the boy I lost. I leaned forward, the papers on the table, the photograph, the birth certificate. All seemed suddenly insignificant compared to what she was about to reveal. I never found out what happened to him, she said. Her eyes were wide and wet, searching mine as if trying to gauge whether I could understand. The state they never let me see him again. I tried years later. After I had built a life here, after we had Delaney, I went through every possible channel to find him, every court, every agency, every record I could request. But the files were sealed. No one would tell me anything. I had to let it go, or at least I tried. Her hands shook as she spoke, fingers twisting the edges of the blanket in the attic photograph I had carried down with me. I could feel the rawness of her grief, a grief that had lasted decades in silence. The letters, she continued, glancing toward the envelope from Hagerstown still sitting on the counter, that they started arriving a few months ago. Someone claiming to know where he is. I thought it might finally be my chance to see him, to reach him, to know he's safe. But her voice faltered, catching on the edge of fear. I leaned in, my heart pounding. But what? But the letters. They weren't straightforward. Whoever sent them, she swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. They warned me. They said, someone else is looking for him too. The words hit me like ice water. My mind raced. Someone else? Who else could possibly be interested in a boy Marianne had lost decades ago? Danger, I realized with a cold twist in my stomach, had stepped silently into our lives. Marianne's past wasn't just painful, it was now active, reaching toward us, bringing a threat I hadn't anticipated. I tried to process it, the years of silence, the secrecy, the sudden urgency. Someone had been watching, waiting. And now they were moving, and Marianne, she had been carrying this danger silently, hiding it behind decades of normalcy. While I had believed our life was ordinary and safe. David Klein, I said quietly, my voice tense. The man who called, the one who said the past doesn't stay buried, could he be connected? She flinched at the name. I don't know. I can't be sure. But the timing, the letters, and now that call, it all feels connected. And I fear it's only going to get worse if we don't act carefully. I felt a mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just about discovering secrets anymore. It was about protecting Marianne, protecting the family we had built. The attic, the letters, the hidden birth certificate. They were no longer curiosities or relics of a past life. They were warnings, clues, keys to understanding a danger that had slipped quietly into our lives. I reached across the table and took her hand, trembling with both fear and resolve. We'll figure this out, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. We'll find him, Marianne, and we'll find out who's looking and why. Whatever it takes, we'll face this together. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw the weight of decades lift slightly, replaced by the first spark of relief, knowing I was no longer ignorant of the truth, knowing I could share the burden of her secret. But the urgency lingered, hanging between us like a shadow. I could feel it in my chest. The calm life I thought we had, the safety I had taken for granted, had ended. The past Marianne had hidden was no longer hidden, and it had claws reaching into the present, demanding answers and action. For the first time in decades, I realized the full magnitude of what we were facing. This wasn't just about a hidden child or decades of secrecy. It was about danger, about threats we had never imagined, about a past that had come roaring into the life I had thought I knew. And deep down, I understood something I hadn't before. Time would not protect us. Silence would not protect us. Only action, courage, and uncovering the full truth could. If someone from your spouse's past warned you about a threat to a lost family member, how far would you go to uncover the truth? It was nearly midnight when the knock came. I was in the living room, sifting through the attic papers again, trying to make sense of all the fragments of Marianne's past. The house was silent, the kind of silence that usually made me feel safe. But this time it felt like tension itself had settled in the corners. I hesitated before opening the door. A man stood there in the shadows of the porch light, tall, with silver hair combed neatly back. His eyes were sharp, aware, but there was a calmness to him, an authority that made me immediately uneasy. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, his voice steady. "I'm David Klein. May I come in?" I froze, recognizing the name instantly. The same man who had called a few weeks ago. The man who had cryptically warned that the past doesn't stay buried. My heart thumped in my chest, a mix of fear and curiosity pressing against me. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. Inside, he removed his coat and glanced around the living room, as if absorbing the environment, sizing up the situation. I gestured toward the couch. He sat without hesitation, placing a worn briefcase on the coffee table. "I'm retired now," he began, his eyes meeting mine. "I used to work in social services in Williamsport. Decades ago, I was assigned to a case, a difficult one involving a newborn placed in state custody. The mother, Margaret Ellison." I stiffened. Margaret Ellison. Marianne. All the hidden pieces of the puzzle were finally connecting, and yet my chest tightened with the weight of what was about to come. "Your wife, Marianne, she kept it hidden, yes. And I understand why," David continued, his tone measured, almost gentle. "But I came because I believe her son may be in danger. His name is Caleb. He's grown now, searching for his birth mother, and he may have run into trouble." The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" David took a deep breath. "I don't know all the details. What I do know is that Caleb has been trying to find her for years, and someone connected to Margaret's past, someone dangerous, has taken an interest in him." I felt my stomach drop. Marianne's past, Margaret's past, was no longer just a story from decades ago. It was alive, reaching into the present, and now it threatened the child she had lost. My mind raced. All those unanswered questions, the letters, the warnings, this was why. Her ex-boyfriend, David said carefully, he didn't disappear like everyone thought. He resurfaced recently. He's been moving quietly, and he has connections. Caleb might have unknowingly drawn his attention. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. I felt a surge of anger, fear, and helplessness at once. Marianne had built a life here, safe in Lancaster, away from all of this. And now, decades later, the past had come back not just to her, but to the son she had never told me about. I looked at Marianne, who had been standing silently near the kitchen doorway. Her hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white. "Caleb, my son," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, trembling with a mix of fear and hope. "He's alive." David nodded. "Yes, and he's searching for you. But he may be walking into danger that he doesn't fully understand. That's why I came. He needs protection, guidance, and someone who knows the truth. And right now, that someone is you, and you, Mr. Whitmore." I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about uncovering secrets anymore. This was about action, about stepping into a situation that had been brewing for decades, about protecting a young man I had never met, and supporting the woman I loved, whose life had already been shaped by trauma and silence. And the ex? I asked, my voice firm now, though my hand was still shaking. He's alive? He could hurt Caleb? David's eyes darkened slightly. I can't say for sure, but the risk is real. He has the same volatility, the same obsession he had back then. And he knows the boy exists. If Caleb gets too close, or if he uncovers the connection to Marianne, that could draw him out. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The life we had built, the quiet days on Greenfield Road, the comfort of routines, all of it now seemed fragile. We were standing at the edge of something dangerous, something I had no training to handle but could not ignore. David leaned forward, pressing his hands together. I didn't come to scare you. I came to warn you, to prepare you. If you want to help Caleb, if you want to protect him and Marianne, you need to act fast. The letters, the warnings, they're not idle threats. They're signs. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight settle on my shoulders. The past had been buried for decades, yes, but now it was here knocking at my door, demanding attention, demanding courage. And there was no turning back. I glanced at Marianne, her eyes wide, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table. She met my gaze, and in that moment I understood the truth. Whatever came next, we would face it together. We left Lancaster early the next morning, the car loaded with luggage, papers, and a tense determination that I had never felt before. Marianne sat in the passenger seat, quiet, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the road. David drove, his face set and serious, as though he had seen too many lives unravel to underestimate the stakes. I sat in the back, my mind racing, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and urgency. Our destination was Frederick, Maryland, the last known address Caleb had used, provided by the most recent letter Marianne had received. The city sprawled in the early sunlight, its streets buzzing with morning activity, completely unaware of the storm that had followed us from Lancaster. We parked in front of a small, unremarkable apartment building. The unit we were looking for was on the second floor, a modest place that, on the surface, looked normal enough, but something about it felt off, as though the air itself had been holding its breath. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked firmly. Still nothing. The mailbox was overflowing, letters spilling out onto the concrete below. David frowned and motioned for us to step aside, keeping an eye on the street. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. "He's been here recently. Someone's been keeping him on the move." I bent to pick up the mail. Bills, advertisements, letters addressed to Caleb in neat handwriting, none of them opening the answers we needed. A growing sense of dread settled in my chest. Marianne's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. I looked at her and saw fear mirrored in her eyes, a reflection of my own. A neighbor, a middle-aged woman watering plants near the staircase, noticed us. "Are you looking for Caleb?" she asked cautiously, glancing at David. Marianne nodded. "He lives here," the woman said, her voice tight. "I haven't seen him in a few days. But there was a man, tall, harsh voice, came by earlier this week. Asked questions. Told him to keep quiet. Scared me a little." I froze. The description matched Rory Maddox exactly. Tall, threatening, relentless. My fists clenched, my stomach twisting into knots. Marianne's lips trembled, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "He's missing," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. The words hung heavy between us, each syllable pressing into the silence. David spoke next, his voice controlled but grim. "This confirms what I feared. Rory Maddox is on Caleb's trail. He's aware the boy is searching for his mother. If Caleb stayed put, he would have been found already. Someone moved him, or worse, forced him to leave." I could feel the anger building inside me, hot and consuming. The thought that Marianne's son, a man who had every right to live free, was now at the mercy of a man who had once threatened his life, made my blood boil. But there was no time for fury, not yet. Right now we had to find him. Marian whispered almost to herself, "Caleb, where are you?" Her voice cracked, raw with worry and desperation. I felt my own throat tighten at hearing it. For the first time, the weight of decades of hidden pain, her pain, my discovery, the danger he was in collapsed onto me in a single, suffocating wave. David started questioning the neighbors further, walking carefully up and down the street, asking if anyone had seen a young man matching Caleb's description. A few people shook their heads, some shrugged, and one older man muttered that he'd seen someone fitting the description leaving in a hurry a few nights ago. No one had details, no one had clues, just the lingering impression of a sudden disappearance. We returned to the car, a heavy silence falling over us. Marian stared out the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the glass. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, trying to process everything at once. Caleb, our connection to the past, Marianne's secret, her lost son, was out there somewhere. And the man who had nearly destroyed his life decades ago might be close behind. David finally broke the silence. We need to move quickly. Whoever's after him won't stop. Rory doesn't give up. And Caleb, he's alone right now, unaware of how dangerous this is. I nodded, my jaw tight. We'll find him, I said more firmly than I felt. No matter what it takes, we're going to find Caleb before anything happens. Marian leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. He has to be safe, she whispered, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I won't forgive myself if he's hurt. And at that moment I realized the truth. The past wasn't finished with us. It had followed us here to Maryland, to Caleb, and to the fragile hope that we could reach him before Rory Maddox did. Time was running out, and every second felt like a countdown. We drove off, following leads, calling numbers, searching apartments, streets, and shelters. Every shadow, every figure passing by could be him, or the danger. The search had begun in earnest, and I could feel the tension tighten with every mile, every moment. Caleb was out there. We had to find him. We left Lancaster early the next morning, the car loaded with luggage, papers, and a tense determination that I had never felt before. Marianne sat in the passenger seat, quiet, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the road. David drove, his face set and serious, as though he had seen too many lives unravel to underestimate the stakes. I sat in the back, my mind racing, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and urgency. Our destination was Frederick, Maryland, the last known address Caleb had used, provided by the most recent letter Marianne had received. The city sprawled in the early sunlight, its streets buzzing with morning activity, completely unaware of the storm that had followed us from Lancaster. We parked in front of a small, unremarkable apartment building. The unit we were looking for was on the second floor, a modest place that, on the surface, looked normal enough, but something about it felt off, as though the air itself had been holding its breath. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked firmly. Still nothing. The mailbox was overflowing, letters spilling out onto the concrete below. David frowned and motioned for us to step aside, keeping an eye on the street. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. "He's been here recently. Someone's been keeping him on the move." I bent to pick up the mail. Bills, advertisements, letters addressed to Caleb in neat handwriting, none of them opening the answers we needed. A growing sense of dread settled in my chest. Marianne's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. I looked at her and saw fear mirrored in her eyes, a reflection of my own. A neighbor, a middle-aged woman watering plants near the staircase, noticed us. "Are you looking for Caleb?" she asked cautiously, glancing at David. Marianne nodded. "He lives here," the woman said, her voice tight. "I haven't seen him in a few days. But there was a man, tall, harsh voice, came by earlier this week. Asked questions. told him to keep quiet. Scared me a little. I froze. The description matched Rory Maddox exactly. Tall, threatening, relentless. My fists clenched, my stomach twisting into knots. Mary Ann's lips trembled, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "He's missing," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. The words hung heavy between us, each syllable pressing into the silence. David spoke next, his voice controlled but grim. "This confirms what I feared. Rory Maddox is on Caleb's trail. He's aware the boy is searching for his mother. If Caleb stayed put, he would have been found already. Someone moved him, or worse, forced him to leave." I could feel the anger building inside me, hot and consuming. The thought that Mary Ann's son, a man who had every right to live free, was now at the mercy of a man who had once threatened his life, made my blood boil. But there was no time for fury, not yet. Right now we had to find him. Marian whispered almost to herself, "Caleb, where are you?" Her voice cracked, raw with worry and desperation. I felt my own throat tighten to hearing it. For the first time, the weight of decades of hidden pain, her pain, my discovery, the danger he was in collapsed onto me in a single, suffocating wave. David started questioning the neighbors further, walking carefully up and down the street, asking if anyone had seen a young man matching Caleb's description. A few people shook their heads, some shrugged, and one older man muttered that he'd seen someone fitting the description leaving in a hurry a few nights ago. No one had details, no one had clues, just the lingering impression of a sudden disappearance. We returned to the car, a heavy silence falling over us. Marian stared out the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the glass. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, trying to process everything at once. Caleb, our connection to the past, Marianne's secret, her lost son, was out there somewhere. And the man who had nearly destroyed his life decades ago might be close behind. David finally broke the silence. "We need to move quickly. Whoever's after him won't stop. Rory doesn't give up. And Caleb, he's alone right now, unaware of how dangerous this is." I nodded, my jaw tight. "We'll find him," I said more firmly than I felt. "No matter what it takes, we're going to find Caleb before anything happens." Marian leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. "He has to be safe," she whispered, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I won't forgive myself if he's hurt." And at that moment I realized the truth. The past wasn't finished with us. It had followed us here to Maryland, to Caleb, and to the fragile hope that we could reach him before Rory Maddox did. Time was running out, and every second felt like a countdown. We drove off, following leads, calling numbers, searching apartments, streets, and shelters. Every shadow, every figure passing by could be him, or the danger. The search had begun in earnest, and I could feel the tension tighten with every mile, every moment. Caleb was out there. We had to find him. The clue came from an envelope tucked in Caleb's abandoned mailbox, a scribbled note with an address on the outskirts of Hagerstown, a place Mary Ann instantly recognized. My heart pounded as we drove down the dusty road, the late afternoon sun slanting through the trees, painting everything in golden light that felt almost ironic considering the storm we were about to face. David drove cautiously, glancing at us in the rearview mirror. Mary Ann was silent beside me, her hands clutching the edge of her seat. I reached out and squeezed her hand. She gave a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement that this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary. The farmhouse was weathered, abandoned looking from a road, with broken shutters and tall grass curling around the porch. It was a place that seemed forgotten by time. But I knew better. We weren't here to admire the decay. We were here for Caleb and Rory Maddox. David motioned for us to stay low as he approached the door. A muffled sound, a shout, then a grunt, made my stomach twist. I followed quietly behind, peeking through the broken window. Inside, I saw Caleb, sitting on the floor, bruised, blood staining his shirt. He looked up, startled, but relief flashed in his eyes when he recognized Marianne. And there, standing over him, was Rory. His face was twisted in rage, a mix of confusion and delusion. "You took everything from me," he barked. "She was mine. That child was mine. You ruined my family." Marianne stepped forward, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of decades. "Rory, no, you don't understand. I never took him from you. You endangered him. You hurt him. The state took him because of what you did. That baby, it wasn't safe with you." Rory staggered back slightly, disbelief and fury contorting his face. "Lies. You always lied. You left me alone with nothing. I positioned myself between Rory and Marianne, my hands raised, trying to keep him from lunging. "Back off," I said firmly, though my voice wavered with tension. "You don't get to threaten her or him anymore. Step away." Caleb flinched at Rory's shout, but Marianne's gaze didn't waver. "You've been running from the past, Rory, but you have to face the truth. You endangered a child, your child. You can't change that, but you can stop hurting us now." Rory's eyes darted wildly, his delusions mixing with anger. You, how dare you?" David's voice came from the doorway. "Police are on the way. Step back." He had quietly called them while we positioned ourselves. Rory's face contorted in rage, realizing he was cornered. The tension seemed endless. I could feel Marianne's trembling, her fear and anger mixing into a raw strength. She took a step forward, speaking directly to Rory. "I survived. Caleb survived. And you don't get to rewrite history. You lost your chance to be part of that child's life when you hurt him." Rory let out a guttural scream, stumbling backward as if the words physically struck him. Caleb scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide, his trust placed fully in Marianne and us. I stayed close, ready to intervene, every muscle tense, every thought focused on keeping everyone alive. By the time the police arrived, Rory was pacing frantically, shouting and gesturing. Officers moved in swiftly, restraining him as he struggled, still screaming accusations at Marianne and Caleb. We stepped back, our hearts racing, our breaths uneven. Caleb collapsed into Marianne's arms, tears streaming freely. I thought I'd never see you," he whispered. Marianne held him tightly, rocking him gently, murmuring reassurance, a lifetime of fear and longing spilling out in that one embrace. I watched them, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened, the confrontation, the danger, and the fragile reunion. My heart ached with relief, exhaustion, and the realization that our lives had changed irrevocably. But for the first time in decades, the past had been faced, and a measure of healing had begun. Caleb was hospitalized for minor injuries and treated for bruises and stress. Marianne stayed by his side, speaking softly, guiding him through the first moments of reunion. I sat in the waiting room, hands folded, reflecting on everything that had led us here, the letters, the hidden documents, the decades of silence, and the lurking danger of Rory Maddox resurfacing. Once he was stable, Caleb agreed to meet Marianne privately. I gave them space, stepping outside into the cool Lancaster evening, the air still thick with tension, but softened by the calm of the night. I thought about all I had learned. The woman I loved, my Marianne, had carried a wound for decades, a secret so heavy that revealing could have shattered everything or saved lives. When Marianne returned from the meeting, her eyes were red, but there was a softness there I hadn't seen in years. She sat beside me, taking my hand. "He knows now," she said quietly, "and he's forgiven me. Or, at least, he's willing to understand. That's enough for now." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "I get it, Marianne. I understand why you kept everything hidden. It wasn't malice, it was fear, survival. And love, in a way, He wanted to protect him and us. We sat in silence, letting the weight of relief and exhaustion settle over us. I realized something profound. Love isn't about knowing every detail of someone's past. It's about choosing to stay, to protect, and to forgive even when the truth shakes the foundation of your life. I thought about the past weeks, the letters, the attic, the confrontations, the danger. I thought about Caleb, finally safe and aware of the mother who had loved him fiercely, despite all the obstacles. And I thought about Marianne, who had lived through fear, shame, and decades of silence, yet remained the woman I had chosen to spend my life with. "Gerald," she said softly, resting her head on my shoulder. "We survived this. We found him. We're still here. That's all that matters." I kissed the top of her head, feeling the tension finally ease. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We're still here, and we'll face whatever comes next together. No more secrets. No more fear." In that quiet moment, I understood the power of truth, not just as a revelation, but as a force that could heal, unite, and even rebuild trust fractured by decades of fear. I realized that marriage, love, and family weren't about perfection. They were about endurance, courage, and choosing to remain, even when the hardest truths come to light. The road forward wouldn't be simple. There would be challenges, questions, and perhaps lingering pain. But we had faced the past together. And for the first time, I felt the promise of a future not defined by secrecy, but by honesty, courage, and the unbreakable bond of family. I held Marianne's hand tighter and whispered, "No matter what else happens, we stay. We face it all together." And for the first time in decades, the weight of her secrets felt lighter. Not gone, but shared. And that, I realized, was enough. If you're watching the Old Man Tales, comment below. Could you forgive decades of secrets if the truth finally came to light? Would you stay through the hardest truths for love? Share your thoughts and please subscribe to my channel for more stories.